How's it going, Chasers? I hope you're having a kick-ass week. Number 19 of the Chase the Craft podcast is brought to you by Gladfield's Malt. Awesome craft malt made right here in New Zealand. If you haven't tried it yet, I would thoroughly suggest you give it a go. It is also brought to you by Adventures in Homebrewing, a awesome platform to get all your winemaking, beer making, and spirit making needs as well. In America, it's a great online shop that you can buy from. If you go to homebrewing.org/CTC, it'll take you to their specials page. And the great thing is that they give me a kickback for that, which helps support the podcast. And it doesn't cost you anything. So check them out at homebrewing.org/CTC. And last but definitely not least, the podcast is brought to you by the Patreons. Thank you so much, Patreons. I literally can't do this stuff without you. And yes, the Q&A session from this podcast with Lindsay is already over on the Patreon platform. My guest today is Lindsay from Sample Ox. I'm excited about this one, guys. Lindsay is a sensory scientist based in California, and she helps run a company that creates software to help people deal with the sensory side of the business. They've mostly been in beer, and she's got some amazing connections and pedigree within that industry that you'll find out soon enough. People like Dr. Charles Banforth, New Belgium Brewery. If you're into whiskey and you don't know beer, that may not mean anything to you, but for those of you that do know beer, that's saying something. Anyway, these guys are moving out into other products, and whiskey spirits is one of those things. We get to talk all about the apps, how they help consumers, how they help owners or managers or brand ambassadors, people that are developing products within the industry, and how that relates between the consumer and the business. And also we just get to talk about some sensory geekery that'll apply to you at home or if you're developing your own products for commercial needs. Without further ado, Lindsay from Sample Ox. And we're live, guys. Lindsay from Sample Ox, thank you so much for doing this. And I apologize for the scheduling errors. But we're here now. So
we got it.
It's awesome to talk to you. I think that before we get stuck in, we should probably explain to people the niche, the profession that you're in on a sort of more general scale rather than job description, and then how you got here and what you're doing now. Do you want to fill us in?
Sounds good. Yeah, so I am a sensory scientist. My background of getting to the sensory science world was a little roundabout, but I don't know that any sensory scientist just like falls into sensory science. I think it's mostly kind of a passion science. I think we all nerd out about flavor. But my path was I studied biochemistry and molecular biology back in the day, and I worked in a number of labs. And if anybody's kind of done nitty-gritty biochemistry lab work, you'll know that it's kind of isolating and not that fun after a little while. And so I decided to kind of look for something that was a little bit more engaging with human beings and also scientific as well. So then I went to UC Davis to study fermentation. So I have my master's degree, in food science and technology. I studied beer and brewing for the most part. I worked with Dr. Charlie Banforth there. Studied
dropping the big names now.
Dropping the Banforth name. Yeah, I worked with him for a few years. We had a lot of fun. I studied gluten-free beer. Did publish some work on that back in the day before it was like much of a thing. And that's where I kind of fell in love with sensory science. I ended up just taking a whole bunch of sensory classes, mostly offered through the viticulture and enology world. But I just loved the stats. I loved the science. And so I just took all of those classes. So anyway, I ended up getting my degree from UC Davis, and then I started working for New Belgium Brewing Company, where I was there for almost 10 years. And I was in the sensory world. So I managed the sensory QC and R&D consumer research kind of section of that facility. So that was where I kind of spent the last 10 years. And Draught Lab / SampleOx. SampleOx is our new consumer research app, but it's under the Draught Lab company. So Draught Lab was started about 5 years ago now. It was started in 2016, so a little under 5 years ago. And it was just collaboration between, sensory scientists and like really solid process engineering folks who are very good developers and very good thinkers. And so we just kind of got together and decided to kind of make a process out of sensory analysis for all sorts of food and beverages. So now we work primarily with fermented products, but we also have a whole bunch of customers outside of that as well. So we work in chocolate, whiskey, beer, malt, hops, dairy. So we're, anything that can be consumed and anything that is like touch, felt, viewed, anything that purchases are made based on your sensory experience can be applicable for Sampleox or for Draught Lab. So that's kind of what we've been up to, and that's how I got here.
That's super cool, man. Yeah. I didn't know half of that background stuff that you mentioned. And funnily enough, you've got a connection to literally the university where my wife is like this very second working here in New Zealand, which is kind of bizarre. What's the story there?
Yeah, I'm connected to Dr. Joanne Hort. She is a sensory scientist, a very good sensory scientist. So, and you should definitely check out some of her work. She does some really interesting research on emotion and purchase decisions. That's kind of what she's been working on recently. So I've kind of been following her for a little while. But she worked in the craft brewing world or in the brewing world for a while. So we knew each other through the American Society of Brewing Chemists. And that's an organization that I've been a part of for a while. I was the sensory subcommittee chair there for a little while. So we knew each other through there, and she's doing some really interesting flavor research right in your backyard. So if you have the chance to go like get hooked up to electrodes and be fed different flavors, like I would totally do it. I would totally do it.
That sounds terrifyingly awesome. All in one go.
Yeah.
My wife works at in an animal behavior lab there, and getting hooked up to electrodes are a very different experience, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd be happy to get hooked up to a machine and then fed different things. That sounds like great fun.
Mm-hmm.
I am constantly surprised by the caliber of work that's coming out of little old New Zealand, and then even smaller than that, little old Palmerston North is by far a metropolis. So it's exciting for me to have a connection with someone like you on the other side of the planet. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Let's get back to the two apps. So you mentioned you've got Draught Labs and Sampleox. And spoiler alert, guys. We're actually going to do a little test drive of one of these apps today. And spoiler alert, all of you at home get to play along. Not today, obviously, because we're recording this now and sending it out. But we are going to be doing a live stream not long from now when you guys get to play with us. But before we get into that and tell everyone what's going on, do you want to describe the difference between the two apps? Because we've primarily, after discussing this a little bit, focused on Sampleox. So let's discuss Draught Labs and the difference between the two and where they might be used.
Yeah, sure. So Draught Lab was kind of our first baby. And what Draught Lab is really intended for is for businesses, for small businesses that are trying to use flavor information as a means for making everyday product and process decisions. So using that tasting data to kind of figure out what malt you're going to buy, what kind of mash parameters you're going to be utilizing, that kind of thing. And also to ensure quality and consistency. So it's primarily a tool used for professionals that helps them make product decisions, process decisions, also research and development decisions as well. What are you going to make? So that's kind of those are the bullet points of Draught Lab. And Sampleox kind of helps feed into everything that happens before ensuring quality and consistency, which is research and development and just getting consumer insights. So consumer information is incredibly important, just understanding what your consumers like, why they like it, so that you can build your target flavor specifications specific towards those that you're trying to sell your products to.
Yeah.
And so Sampleox is really intended on doing consumer research, but also giving companies the ability to engage their consumers in a more meaningful way. I think right now, a lot of us really want to be a part of the brands that we enjoy, and we want to be a part of the dialogue, and we can be. Like, technology will allow consumers to do that. I know that I'm always wanting to give feedback to my favorite products, to either congratulate them for doing a great job, or make them better, or utilize them a little bit differently. And so a lot of consumers are enthusiastic about the products that they consume, especially in the fermentation world. So especially in the whiskey, beer world, these products already kind of have very, zealots that are, I guess, yeah. So Sampleox is also intended to be a way that companies can engage with their consumers and kind of have a conversation as well, while getting that really important consumer feedback. So it's fun to use. We'll kind of show everybody today, like, generally what it looks like. There's a little bit of competition involved, and I mean, ultimately, it builds community around the products that you're enjoying, and the platform kind of helps to bring people together, even when they're at home, for example.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so the Draught Lab is about kind of creating a product and then creating consistency within that product. So you can try different mash bill, or adding a different specialty grain or a different mash temperature, one at a time, of course, and then do a sensory evaluation on it, and it kind of compiles that data and shows you, I guess, where impactful changes are coming from and where positive or negative, whether the lever's being pushed on the good side or the bad side. So you can make a decision on what you want to create and then keep creating the same thing. And Sampleox brings the customer into that process. It lets the consumer kind of be part of the sensory team, right? Like, it lets them get closer to the companies they love, but then from the company's point of view, they're getting invaluable data that is all curated, I guess, in one sort of specific way. It's not, I mean, because thinking about it, as a distillery, right, you could just get on the internet and start searching, but every time you find someone, they're going to do it in a different way. They're going to, it's going to be written in your own language. It's not going to be concise. It's not going to be something you can throw into a spreadsheet very easily, that's for sure.
Right. Yes, we really wanted the platform to be, useful for the distillery or for the brewery, whoever. And so rather than just kind of giving a blank comment box where people can just type whatever, we use a base lexicon that is, consumer friendly, but also like robust and has a lot of flavor terms in there, for people to be able to select attributes that will be aggregated and can be utilized to help distillers create brands that are specific towards what consumers like. And I have to say, being on the R&D side back at New Belgium, that data is invaluable. It's really invaluable, and it's a little harder to get. So very few companies are doing regular consumer research. So Sampleox, what we're trying to do is like lower that barrier to entry to capturing that really important consumer feedback, so that it can be just running throughout your development process. And for you consumers out there, it really is very important information. So when you're giving feedback to companies, we listen. Like, companies definitely listen.
Totally.
So it's definitely, we know that we're hoping that this information is able to kind of like shape the products that we end up tasting henceforth. So
yeah,
we can we can make products specific towards our flavor preferences. That's kind of the idea.
The whole idea of this, the whole concept of it, is exciting to me, because a lot of these types of companies, I guess fermentation in general, wine, beer, spirits, all of them, they kind of used to be a build it and they will come sort of approach. It's like, I'm the master distiller and this is my art that I am bringing to the world and people will love it, and it just seems like the entire industry is moving away from that so quickly. Like, and people that don't want to get on board with that idea of listening to consumers, like literally getting the consumers to buy into your brand and contribute to the brand and become brand ambassadors and, you know, create those cult followings and interaction between the two. I kind of feel like people that aren't getting on board with that, or people that don't want to move towards that, or heaven forbid if someone started a distillery now and didn't, you know, buy into that. I don't know, man. Yep. Good luck to you.
Right. And I think we underestimate the importance of repeat customers. There's definitely an ROI with getting consumers integrated into your brand's conversation. And, you know, there's having those repeat customers. Those are the ones that are kind of moving the needle for a lot of businesses. And, the piece of the pie now in the distilling world and in the beer world is becoming smaller and smaller. So the competition is pretty major, and I think that that's why a lot more companies are starting to look more towards focusing a little bit more attention and resources to engaging consumers and to really directly marketing and developing towards what their consumers are liking. And big companies have already figured this out. Like major companies have already figured this out, and that's why they've been around for a very long time and are dominant. And what craft companies need to do is kind of follow suit and use some of those same techniques of engaging consumers and utilizing that input to build their products. Otherwise, our share of the pie is going to become smaller and smaller. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, we fairly solidly got off sensory and into marketing there, but I think it's a really good point because people listening to this podcast, there's going to be a split between them, right? There's going to be, you know, most people that listen to my stuff are making their own products, and if not, they love the beverage so much they just want to know everything about it so they can enjoy it more. But then there's kind of a split between those and the people that are dreaming of starting their own company, or have just started their own company, or are trying to get in the door at a company that they already love. And I caution you people, like, don't underestimate the power of tools like this as a marketing tool, as opposed to just the sensory tool, because, you know, like you were just saying, one of the biggest hurdles, one of the biggest things you can do in any form of marketing is to get interaction and engagement. So not just a billboard that you drive past and you see, and then, you know, it kind of went to social media. So now it's a photo that they can actually comment on and share. And now that's kind of disappeared into, it's almost not enough. You want people to actually, you know, engage deeper. So if you can, let's put this into context. One like on Instagram, I mean, that took the person all of 0.5 seconds to hit like and keep scrolling and not care. But if you can get someone to download the app and spend 15 minutes, like specifically interacting with your whiskey and specifically thinking about exactly what's there, what do you think they're going to do the next day? They're going to go and talk to other people and tell other people, this was kind of cool. Why don't you go do it? And this is where your kind of competition gamification sort of thing, I'm sure, has to play into why you built that into the app, right? Because it's fun, right, and it's going to create that interaction.
Yeah, we really just wanted to create a platform for our users to engage with their consumers while getting really important information. And that's, I hate to use a cliche, but that's becoming more important than ever. It's becoming a lot harder for us to kind of have those one-on-one connections with our consumers. There used to be like the tasting room engagement that you could have on a daily basis, and those kind of opportunities have become fewer and fewer in recent days. And it's just becoming a little bit harder to kind of have that face-to-face interaction. So we wanted to create something that kind of allowed people to create an experience around tasting. And luckily, sensory is super fun and tasting is a good time, and we're not making cat food. So like, yeah.
For the cat, however, and also for the product.
That might be a pretty big business though. But no,
I was in pet food up until COVID hit, and then they had to let me go. So it's definitely, if anything, I would say it is, well, it's definitely more competitive than alcohol in a lot of ways, I think. Just, it's a crazy industry.
Yeah.
But the idea did go in the back of my head. Oh, this could actually be kind of interesting.
Yeah.
To use software like that for anything, because even when it's a product where, I mean, you can't ask the cat what it thinks. Are you tasting tuna or salmon, Fluffy?
Right.
That doesn't quite work. But the funny thing is, I mean, a lot of the customers, especially all through Asia, the first thing they'll do is they'll open a bag and they'll eat some themselves and then decide whether or not their cat's going to like it. So yeah, I can see how this app would work everywhere. Sorry. Anyway, I've interrupted you.
No. I mean, but yeah, it's true that it's a fun product. Like whiskey is a fun product anyway. And so if you can just kind of create a little bit more of an experience around it, it's really not too terribly difficult to get consumers to engage with your product. So, but yeah, flavor, we all experience flavor. We all see things, smell things, taste things, feel things. And so I think we all have something that's important and valid to share. And companies generally understand that. I think that there is a pretty strong understanding that consumers are educated. Like they really do know what they're talking about. And in my experience, I've been able to get repeatable and very robust data from consumers. And so it's just a matter of using what we're already doing to making purchase decisions, and then kind of applying that in a way that's a little bit more useful and engaging. And yeah, the gamification piece was certainly like alongside of just trying to incentivize, because a lot of the question comes up, the first question that comes up is like, how do you get people to do this? I'm like, well, first of all, it's really fun, and it's really engaging, it's interesting, and you can create an experience around it. So if you do need to incentivize it, it's possible to use the platform to be able to do that rather than just paying consumers.
Yeah, totally. I am really looking forward to getting into the nitty-gritty of the science that goes in behind the stuff with you. But I feel like first, should we pull up the app and show people? Stop teasing everyone and show it how it actually works.
Yeah.
So while Lindsay's pulling that up, guys, here's the plan. I think this is cool, and I think it's a cool way for not only companies to interact with consumers, but it's a cool way for someone like me who's sitting down here on the arse end of the planet to be able to interact with people just like you who are all over the planet as well. And God knows where you are, and especially right now when we can't travel and so on and so forth. It's kind of nice to find a way to bring everyone together. So Lindsay has very, very graciously helped us set up a little platform. And what we're going to do is we have 4 whiskeys that we're going to put into the app, and all of us can taste it together on the live stream. Or, if you can't make the live stream, we'll leave it open for a little bit longer, and then we'll do a wrap up afterwards. We'll get into more the specifics of how that's going to work after you've seen the app, because I think that'll make things make a little bit more sense. For those of you that are out there listening to this on the podcast, I would suggest jumping over onto YouTube. Check the YouTube channel out, because Lindsay's going to be sharing a screen. You'll be able to see exactly what's going on. Actually, what I might do is I'll put the whole podcast out as a video, but then I'll also cut just this little part of the app out and put that up so you don't have to go sifting through it. I mean, we've got whiskey and we've got time, so I don't know how long this is going to be. Anyway, when you're ready, Lindsay, fire away.
All right, so I'll kind of show you what the app looks like. So it's let's see on the screen. All right, you should be able to see it now. All right, so go ahead and just download Sampleox from Google Play or the Apple Store. It's available where all apps can be found. And Chase the Craft is up here on the front page. But if you wanted to, I know, look how fancy you guys are. You can also search as well with this little search function, just whatever tasting you're looking to engage with. So then you'll just open up the Chase the Craft event, and you'll see we're going to taste one product today together. When we do this for the live stream, we'll have 3 different products. And yeah, there it is. I'm not drinking that, but I am drinking a whiskey. So we'll.
This is the apology that I made at the beginning of the podcast, guys. Things have been kind of hectic for me, and we didn't I didn't organize this in time. So there was a mad rush to go and get something that we could both taste. And the only common thing that we could find together was Amstel Light. And I feel like that's an insult to everyone involved.
Sorry, we decided
Amstel.
not to drink beer. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what's going to happen is the professional or the experts are going to put in verified attributes on the back end, and then you are going to do your evaluation. Your evaluation is going to be compared to their evaluation, and you will get points based on your proximity to their evaluation. And we'll show you what that leaderboard and such looks like. And so I'm going to open up. Yep.
Just to interrupt really quickly, shout out to Jared Himstat. Sorry, dude, what we've done is poach some stuff off your website. So normally in this situation is, you'd have an expert taster or the manufacturer of the products put those verified details in. Just because this is for, demonstration purposes, we've done that for Jared. Thank you and sorry, Jared. When we get to the live stream, we've got a different plan for that. So you can check that out in a bit. Anyway, sorry, Lindsay, carry on. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, so and it was a very robust flavor description, so thank you for that. So the two things that are important is how much you like it and what are the attributes that are in it. So the first thing you're going to see is this Likert scale, and you'll be able to say how much you like it. And of course, we like it extremely. And then you'll be able to
do. This is like one of my favorite whiskeys. It's delicious.
And then you'll be able to assess the color and the clarity and all of the different aromas. So this is the common terminology in the whiskey world from the whiskey flavor map. And you can select the attributes that are in the sample. And this is both ortho and retronasal olfaction. We can talk about that a little bit more, but this is just what are the attributes that you're tasting in the sample. I'm just going to select a few here just to kind of demonstrate what it looks like.
While Lindsay's doing that, guys, I've got the app pulled up on my phone too. So I'm going to go through and evaluate this whiskey as we go. Yes, let's definitely talk about the different, how do you put it? The different ways that your brain can get data from something like this. And why the app's set up how it is. But we'll get through this example, and then maybe that's something we can dive into deep afterwards. So I'm going to set up while Lindsay's talking through it, I'm going to go through and assess this whiskey.
Yeah, you're actually going to assess it. So I'm just kind of saying random things. And so we're going to see if Jesse is better than my random evaluation, which is going to be fun to see. Let's see if he can do better than my random evaluation. All right, and then I'm going to say sweetness and sourness. Just seeing how much sweetness and sourness and bitterness. The body, alcohol, like that alcohol burn, that heat. Somewhere like there. How mouth-watering is it? So how much water does your mouth produce when you are drinking it? And then the astringency, so how much water gets taken away from your mouth. And then the overall spice. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this little check mark to finish. And I'm going to say, yeah, I'm going to finish my rating. I'm going to submit that. And then once Jesse's done, I can show you guys our results and check out the leaderboard. So you'll get like a little grayed out check mark to indicate that you're done with that sample. And now I will show you the results when he's done. But
we don't need to do it completely, but let me get a few things in here just to show what it's going to work out as. Some of that, definitely. And I got to say, guys, this is organized extremely intuitively. It is, I mean, we've talked about this, right, with the malt collab, and this is actually how we found each other. Our friend Matt Drew suggested that I should get in touch with you for that, and we can talk about that later on too. But as we know, guys, trying to figure out how to input all of this, all the different things that you're experiencing in one easy to do method is not a small feat. All right, so actually that's probably good, eh? So do I just click on the tick once I'm done?
Yep, just the little check mark just to say I'm going to submit my results.
Oh, yep. Okay, so once I do that, I get a little thing. Oh, you would have seen with Lindsay saying submit. Cool. All right, so now we get to look at the results.
All right, so I'm going to check out the leaderboard, and you can see. Oh, you need to put in your name, but we see the blank person here is Jesse, and I'm Laser, and I actually did better than you did.
You did. You destroyed me.
So this is the palette score. So the palette score is calculated based on your proximity of your evaluation to that of the professional. So you will, when you log in, you'll see your name here, and we'll be able to see who's leading, and who's doing best, and where you lie. And then you can also see, this is a pretty cool thing, you can see what you rated, and then you can see what other people were saying about it as well. So you can see I said it was dark brown, Jesse said it was ruby brown, and we both agreed that it was clear. That was also a verified attribute. So the professionals also agreed with us that it was clear. So you can also kind of educate yourself on what other flavors exist, what other attributes people are picking out, and what you got right, and maybe what you need to work on. So this is what that looks like. And then you can have a history of all of your different tasting results. So you can go into this little ribbon, and you can see all of the different tastings that you've done, and revisit some of those attributes that you've experienced in the past. So that's kind of the gist. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen now so I can see your face again. And
so the brown bars were what you had put in on any given sample, and the blue bars were an average of what everyone else had put in?
It's actually just counts. So yeah, I said anything that's colored red is something that I said, and then the length of the bar is going to be the count. And the blue is something that anybody else said, but I didn't say, and then that little green check mark is indicates a verified attribute
of what the expert said.
Yep, exactly.
Awesome. And then the beauty of it is, if you're a producer, now you've got all this data ready to roll. Do you want to show? Are we able to show really quickly what the company would see from the back end in terms of data that they get? Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot here. I know, but
no, that's fine. I can show you really quickly. It's not too difficult to pull up. And all right, I'll pull you up.
Even a beer example or something, if there's a bit more data and something that's obviously safe to be shared.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm not going to pull up like some company's data.
Yeah.
I'll show you an example of something that we did the other day, actually during a UC Davis tasting. So I'll show you what the results look like there. I'm pulling it up. People are picking out, and mouthfeels and that kind of thing. Yeah, so that's kind of the basics of what the analytics that one gets. There's a little bit more there's two different types of modules. There's a little bit more in another module, but for just the basics, you'll get an idea of the hedonic distribution and the attributes that are coming out of that sample.
That is really freaking cool.
Thank you.
So I hope people at home can see why this is exciting from both points of view, right? It's exciting for the company that could potentially use it to improve their product, and at the end of the day, put money in the bank. Like, that's what a company does. Get over it if you're one of those do it for the art people. It's the way it is, man. You got to make a living, and it's also really, really exciting for the consumer, especially in, like you said earlier, products like this where, let's face it, us consumers fancy ourselves, we fancy ourselves to be able to actually pull a product apart and figure out what's in there and figure out why it's good or why it's bad. It's not a product where you just kind of consume it mindlessly. The whole point of this stuff is that we enjoy it, and we enjoy what it brings to the table and why it's different from something else. And so the fit together is absolutely beautiful. I'm very, very happy to have discovered this, and I need to use it more, but at this stage, I can thoroughly recommend it to anyone that is thinking about it. Let's talk about what we're going to do for the live stream. So now I hope people can kind of get an idea of how the app works and what it's capable of. The plan is we're going to get at this stage four different whiskeys that you guys can get at home. Now, you may not be able to get all of them. You may not even want to get all of them, but we've picked 4 that are kind of representative of the craft, I guess you would say, in that 2 of them are going to be super, super easy to get. We say that. Lindsay went looking for one today and couldn't find it. But they're on the cheaper side of commercial bottles, and you can get them in mini bottles as well. So please, guys, you don't need to run out and get expensive bottles to get involved with this. So those 2 are going to be Monkey Shoulder and Johnny Walker Black. So feel free to grab either one of those or both of those if you want to participate. The other 2 are, we wanted to represent the craft scene a little bit, and being a prideful Anzac Kiwi down here, I wanted to have something from New Zealand. So we went with Jesus, Jesse, Starwood Nova. And the reason for that is you can get that in America. So if you want to pick up a bottle of Starwood Nova, which I would thoroughly recommend, by all means do. And lastly, we're going with the Cedar Ridge, Iowa bourbon to represent craft in America, because Murphy's products are available pretty widely as well. The plan is, guys, is that we are going to get 2 whiskey tubers to evaluate the Monkey Shoulder and the Johnny Walker, because unfortunately, I don't think I've got enough sway to get on the phone and say, Mr. Johnny Walker, give us your flavor, your flavor profiles. So one of those people is going to be Roy from Aquavite, and the other is going to be Daniel Whittington from the Whiskey Tribe, which is pretty freaking exciting. And when it comes to the Supernova and the Iowa Bourbon, Murphy and Sam from their respective companies are going to be doing the tasting, the expert tasting notes for those. So in short, guys, here's how it works. Grab 1 or 4 of those bottles if you can. And on the live stream, we're going to sort of walk you through, handhold you through exactly how to do that. And what it means is that you're going to be tasting products from all over the world together with a medium that lets us all see what everyone else is doing, which is pretty freaking cool. And you at home get to compare your palate, what you're tasting, to Roy, Daniel, Sam, and Murphy, which is, I don't know, that's pretty exciting to me. I think that's going to be pretty awesome. I just want to say right now, guys, that this stuff is subjective, so it's not all about the guys that are doing this are right, and if you don't get the same scores, you're wrong. It is interesting data, and it's a bit of fun. And when you aggregate enough people together, then the data itself becomes meaningful. So we're not here to tell you your shit, is what I'm saying. It's all in good fun. There will be more details for this going out in the comments down below this video. So by all means, guys, get down there and check that out. I'll also put something up on Facebook. So if you're not a member of the Chase the Craft Facebook page, go ahead and do that now. That's Chasers of the Craft. And I will be, obviously the Patreons will get plenty of information about it, and it'll go out on the mailing list too, guys. So if you're interested in that, check those places out to find the details. We have yet to set an exact date, but it's probably going to be sometime in around about the next 10 days is my guess, just to get the quote-unquote expert judging details in. Have you got anything else to add to that, Lindsay? Have I missed anything that's important about that?
You represented that perfectly. Oh, yes, thank you. Well done. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be a good time. I'm curious to see how my palette stacks up, and yeah, it's good to say too, like, yeah, this is all subjective, but it's kind of fun to just like all be tasting together and seeing what everybody else is picking out.
Yeah, totally. I think that's actually, I mean, that's a great place to kick off the more nerdy talk. Right. Mm-hmm. And anyone that knows me know that when I say nerdy geeky, that is 100% a compliment, not an insult.
Oh yeah, I'm into it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So sensory science and subjectivity.
Yeah. You're like, go. Yeah. I can just go from there if you'd like. Yeah, so I think that's a good question, Jesse. Sensory science and subjectivity.
Thank you for making me feel better.
Yeah. It's actually it's one of the it's one of the first questions that I end up getting when I say that I'm a sensory scientist. It's, oh, well, isn't taste subjective? Isn't our flavor, preferences and perceptions subjective? And so how can you actually verify and validate that your people are giving you repeatable information? And I think that it's a very good first step into having a conversation about flavor perception. Yes, taste is absolutely subjective, and a lot of sensory scientists will just try to diminish that subjectivity as much as they possibly can. And my preference is to embrace the subjectivity. Like, we really need both the subjective and objective evaluations, because if you think about it, objective evaluations from like a trained and highly calibrated panel really doesn't mean anything unless we know the liking information, unless we know hedonic subjective information. Just being able to highly, to very specifically describe a product does not really help us if we can't end up drawing it back to liking. And again, going back to our previous conversation, how are we going to sell this? People need to buy this. So you really have to marry those two things. Additionally, if you only have liking information, but you can't actually describe why it's liked, then you don't have the ability to create flavor specifications and targets for the products that you're making. So you really kind of need both. And when you're training yourself to be a calibrated sensory instrument, I think you need to start with how much you like it. A lot of what we do is just the first knee-jerk reaction we're going to make is why do we like it? The thing is if we don't like something, then we need to get curious about why and start thinking about the attributes that maybe drive that disliking along with our liking. I always thought that some of our best sensory panelists were the people who really didn't like beer. Because they could be fully objective about it. They're like, this is not fun for me, but I'm just being an instrument and telling you what's in it. So, when moving from the subjective to the objective, it takes some training, it takes some like mindfulness, and really just like picking apart the attributes from the product. And you've noticed with sample locks, we start with how much do you like it? And then we move into the nitty-gritty kind of more objective evaluation. And that's on purpose. We want people to first make a knee-jerk reaction about how much they like a product. That's going to be the most accurate representation of real liking. And then we want them to kind of move their brain into, okay, now what's actually in it? And tools like lexicons that are specific towards a product and created by producers is helpful to kind of get people off and running with describing their flavor experience. It's very difficult for people to describe their flavor experience. If you think about the brain, it's easy for us to make an emotional connection to flavor, liking, disliking, sadness, happiness. And that's what Joanne Hort is doing. Like, that emotional connection is rapid, it's fast, it's easy to make.
And it'll even put you in a place. Like, you'll smell something and go, that's grandma's house.
Yeah.
And for the next 45 minutes, you'll be trying to figure out what the hell is it cookie? Is it mothball? Is it, but the emotional connection's just instant.
And I think we need to embrace that emotional connection and then draw out. That's part of training, like drawing out, okay, well, what is it about your grandmother's house? Is it the potpourri or whatever? Yeah. And then you can kind of figure out, all right, you mean rose, and rose, you mean maybe geraniol if you wanted to get really specific. Yeah. But our brain, it doesn't function in a way that it's easy for us to tie language to flavor experiences. And so that those connections kind of need to happen over time. And what's cool about, having a community of tasters is you can have these conversations together. And that's partially just training, and using a lexicon that's already built is really helpful for people to draw the connection from, okay, I'm smelling something fruity. Okay. Oh, it's kind of citrusy. It's not really tropical. What kind of citrus is it? And it's not really grapefruit. It's more orange. And so you can kind of follow your experience with that lexicon to help people really hone in on what it is they're experiencing. So yes, it's subjective, but you can also marry in the objective.
Yeah. And I think the lexicon is really important too, because there's certain things that you just can't, you can't describe without it. And it's kind of a case of, because I think what people talk about when they talk about subjectivity, right, is the whole idea of your blue is different than my blue. but we can both look at something and say that's blue. And in some ways, it almost doesn't matter what we're seeing. And so going back to the lexicon idea, something like dank in the beer world is, how do you describe the smell of dank hops without using the word dank? Like it's tricky, man. And I think if we back up to something a little bit less, let's take something totally hot sauce, chili. Yes, it's subjective. So you can give me a chili, and now I'm living down in New Zealand and I'm a wuss. So I could taste it and say it's crazy hot. And I could give exactly the same stuff to you and you'd say it's mild. What are you talking about? There's almost nothing here. But then you could give us a second brand and put it next to it, and we could both agree that yes, this one is hotter or not as hot as the first one. And we could both agree, we could both make a statement saying whether or not I like it. Yes, I like it because the chili is, medium hot and I like medium hot. Now we're starting to get to data that is meaningful for a company, right? Like it doesn't matter whether it's 15 or 72 on a scale. It's what is the stick in the sand, and is that good, bad, too much, too little? I guess the trick is then moving that into a super complex thing where there's literally hundreds and hundreds of different flavors that add up to yum or yuck.
There's so much there. So I mean, what you basically just described just then was calibration. How do you calibrate your panelists? And it's creating different experiences. So if you think about flavor training, I can't assume that you've experienced a banana before. Like you probably have, but maybe you haven't. And so the idea that like I have this experience of bananas in my life and you may not have experiences of bananas in my life puts us at two different places. And so when you know what kind of flavor attributes are kind of present in your products, it's important for professionals to train their panelists to be able to kind of get on the same page with what that means. And that could be as simple as like giving you a banana and telling you that's a banana. And so now we're both calibrated on what we mean by a banana. And so that kind of thing can happen pretty easily. It doesn't have to be overly complicated. But then you kind of talked a little bit too about like, well, I mean, there are so many complex aromas and features in whiskey and beer and these fermented products. And that's absolutely true. And I embrace that variability. I think that for any product, there's a range of variability, of allowable variability. And it could be anywhere from, like moderate to heavy sweetness, and that could be okay. Or maybe sometimes it's nutty and other times it's more grassy, and that could be okay as well. So it's really kind of up to the company to decide what is the acceptable level of variation in our product and kind of set that target description as the basis for which you're measuring quality and consistency. And so I think where a lot of sensory scientists get into trouble is by trying to force very specific measurements with human subjects that are inherently variable. And with a product that is inherently variable as well. So we really have to be pragmatic about our approach with what it is we can achieve with consistency. Otherwise, we're just going to be spinning our wheels and maybe dumping product that was totally suitable to sell. That's kind of my take on it. Those are the things that keep me up at night.
I've had a question that I've always wanted to ask a sensory scientist, and I've had this experience multiple times where the banana example is perfect, right? You carry an idea of what banana tastes like in your head, and then blueberries are the one that really hit me. Like I've got this idea of blueberry in my head of what blueberry tastes like. Then I put blueberry in my mouth and eat it, and it doesn't taste anything like blueberry to me.
Yeah.
There's this weird disconnect, and it's kind of, I don't know, man. I assume that I've got some anchor in my, like there's an anchor to flavor that I've got that was probably like, I don't know, blueberry ice cream or like a weird blueberry confectionery or something that never actually tasted like blueberry, but that's what my mind thinks blueberry tastes like. It's like, what's going on there?
Yeah, I get it. I think a lot of like, if you think about, I was thinking about this the other day, if you think about like purple, like what comes to mind? What flavor comes to mind?
Grape.
Grape, yeah. Like almost
Yeah.
everybody says grape. Like when it tastes like purple, it tastes like grape. And what you mean by grape is like Concord grape. And like the Concord grape is going to be from like candy for the most part. Like it's going to be from like jellies or jams or that kind of thing, kind of candy. And so we make these like subconscious associations really quickly. And I mean, I just mentioned a whole bunch of different things like visual bias and that sort of thing. But I think we draw those, a lot of those associations are from maybe like synthetic versions of what the actual thing is. And that's fine as long as that's what we mean when we're talking about
that's
it.
That's kind of what I'm getting at, right?
Yeah.
Like, two different people can say blueberry and mean very different things. I had a buddy when we were in Cairns. The guy refused to eat any fruit or vegetables at all.
Weird.
And he jumped into a car and went, "Oh, it smells like banana milkshake in here." And we all turned around and looked at him, and the girl in the front seat was eating a banana. I'm like, dude, really? That's like, yeah.
That's actually just a genuine banana.
Yeah. Oh, the horror. But yeah, it's a good illustration to go back to what you said, right? Is you cannot assume that someone has had the exact flavor you're describing. And on top of that, it's like when I think banana, I think of, I don't know the name of the ester, but the ester that shows up in like Belgian beers, for example. It's like a very one-dimensional, it's what, sorry?
Isoamyl acetate.
Thank you very much. That's why we have you. But when you actually smell a real banana or eat a real banana, there's so much more going on than just that one thing, right?
Right.
And I think going back to the idea of training yourself to be able to taste whiskey, one of Daniel Whittington's sort of lines is just like, stop and smell the roses, man. Like anywhere you are in life, just actually go and smell the freaking rose, because chances are it doesn't smell exactly like you remembered it. And the act of doing it specifically and purposefully, it gives you another trigger in your brain. It's just like another little roadmap that says, you know, if you hit something that's vaguely floral, maybe it reminds you of rose or geranium or whatever it is. Or, you know, when you're in the supermarket, stop and pick up a pawpaw or a mango or a banana and actually smell it. That's fascinating to me. Sorry, carry on.
I mean, those are some of my favorite trainings are just literally going and grabbing a whole bunch of citrus fruits and having people smell them and try to describe an orange without saying the word orange, which is like super hard and kind of fun. But it is, you think that you can tell the difference between an orange and a lemon and a lime and a grapefruit, but like sometimes you just can't. And so, and then we kind of like, a lot of times in beer specifically, spin our wheels by trying to train panelists to use this fairly specific language, like saying isoamyl acetate instead of banana. And that can be very time consuming and really, expensive and whatnot. And a lot of times for beer, I think it's unique to beer. We've worked with a whole bunch of different categories now, and they're all kind of a little bit perplexed at breweries' obsession with doing this really nitty-gritty chemical-based analysis and defect-based trainings. And so what a lot of people really should be kind of focusing on first is what are the attributes that make up your product, rather than focusing so heavily on defect. There's a time and place to focus on defects and for getting really nitty gritty with your language. That's part of quality control. But I think one of the first thing that a producer should really be doing is understanding the flavors that make their product their product. So what are the attributes that are supposed to be there? And luckily, a lot of us do have similar flavor experiences, so we generally kind of know what we mean by citrus fruits. And sometimes it's not really that important for a producer to define that, oh, this aroma that it's in this whiskey is not just orange, or it's not just citrus, it's like orange peel. Like that's almost like a little too focused, because like, are you are you really going to dump a product because it's more orange pithy than orange peel like?
Yeah.
So you kind of have to just be really pragmatic about it. It might be good enough to just say citrus. We just agree that it's citrusy and we know what that means, and we have experience with our product. And really nothing can substitute for experience with the product. You can describe something really perfectly and really pinpointedly and get an idea of what it's supposed to taste like. But if you don't have pretty consistent experience with it, then it's difficult to understand if something's out or in a variability within that product category. So that's a lot of words.
So I think there's a lot of people at home right now that are enjoying the theory of this, but have no idea how to put it into practice, especially if they're a tiny little distillery and there's only, 3 of them on board, and they're trying to do sensory with, just them, or, someone like me I'm sitting at home making it by myself and I can get my wife's opinion on it. Do you kind of have like a bare bones approach, or like, I know this is asking you to condense your entire life's work into 10 minutes, but so if I wanted to figure out whether or not a variable that I've changed has made an impact on a product, or I wanted to work out for myself, do I really like this better than that, or is it all just in my head and I'm telling myself lies, all that sort of stuff? Have you got a process that we can go through without having to have a huge budget to start to peek behind the curtain a little bit?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And what you just asked is exactly the question that we kind of asked ourselves when forming Draught Lab. It was like, okay, well, why are we all doing this so differently? Like, sensory shouldn't be this kind of like one-off thing. There should be a process that anybody could use to be able to define their products, analyze for consistency, and then being able to troubleshoot problems. And so what we did, like the first thing that we did was just try to synthesize down, okay, well, what is the sensory process that any producer can do? And there's really a difference between like statistically valid and actionable information. And we really want to focus, well, with Draught Lab, there are 3 different feature tiers. There's a basic feature tier, quality control, and then enterprise feature tier. And the basic feature tier is really created for those panels that you just described. So it's maybe 3 or 4 producers, and don't have a lot of time, don't have a really big budget to be doing sensory analysis on a regular basis, but we just need the ability to describe our products, be able to identify when maybe they're in or outer specifications so it can inform process parameters, and then give us an ability to troubleshoot what's happening in our process if we find something that's a little awry. And so the basic process that anybody can do is first take some time to understand your product. So to define the attributes that make your product, and that can look as simple as what we just did with Sampleox, which is using a common lexicon to define the flavor characteristics that make up that product. And then from that evaluation, you can that will result in a target description that is really easy to understand. So just what are the visual attributes, what are the aromas, what are the tastes, and what are the mouth feels that define this, and that becomes your target specification. Which is really similar to like an analytical target specification. We might be shooting for a certain alcohol level, and you know what that alcohol level is and the range of variability that's acceptable for sale. It's the same thing with sensory. We know that our flavor target is this, and we know that there's a range of acceptability within that. So it's kind of treated the same way. So once you have that target description, you can use that for a whole bunch of different tests. So the next test that we would use for quality control is what we call the true to target test. And so now we have our target definition, and now you're going to be evaluating another sample of the same brand, and you're basically comparing it to that target description. And the question is this sample in front of you true to target or not? And if not, then why? And then you can, if you have 3 out of your 4 panelists saying that something is not true to target because it's too oaky, then that's meaningful information. And you can go back and look at maybe your maturation parameters and modify that to be a little bit more consistent and in line. And distilled products, I think, are interesting because there's a decent amount of flexibility with, it's not as flexible as like vintages with wine or whatnot. There's still kind of an expected consistency with the products, but there's a little bit of variability that's going to be expected from the consumer. And so you can kind of have an idea of what that is. And it's also a very shelf-stable product as well. So you might be able to even remember what a good version tastes like by kind of calibrating yourself on that too. Unlike with beer, you can't do that with beer. So the idea is define that target, then measure against that target, and then you can utilize that information to troubleshoot. So that's kind of it. Like, what is it that you're making, and then can you measure against what you're making? And you can even do this in the concept phase, in the R&D phase. So what I want to make something that's really oaky, smoky, nutty, and floral, and write those things down. And then as you kind of go into prototyping or as you go into distilling, you can compare what your target specifications were next to what you're actually experiencing flavor-wise. And it really doesn't have to be more complicated than that, and you're kind of off to the races. That's what you're going to be doing 80% of the time, regardless of the size of your business. I mean, the largest companies mostly do quality control analysis, like I just kind of described.
What are your thoughts on kind of the idea of trying to remove personal or emotional bias from a process like this? So, I mean, home brewing, home distilling is ripe with it, right? You've all had that guy come up. If you're in the hobby at all, you've all had that person come up to you and go, "Try this, it's delicious," and you try not to make a funny face right in his face. And we've all had it the other way too, right? You've all made something and you've been so invested in it, and then you try it a week later or something and go, "Oh man, what was I thinking?" Or you try it, you've got an idea of what the last one you made was, you made a change. "Oh, this is so much better." And then you sit down and try it next to you A/B them next to each other and you go, "Oh, actually, I can't even tell the difference." I mean, what are your thoughts on how deep down that rabbit hole you go of trying to remove that human element from it? Because I think you kind of touched on this before, right? Like in some ways you're saying, just get on with it, like just do it. But it's also a real thing. So I'm really interested to see what your advice for someone like us is on these sort of things.
Yeah. I mean, I think that sample ox kind of plays an important role in that, because it's not just a distiller handing something to a patron on the other side of the bar saying, "How much do you like it? I made it." Don't hurt my feelings. And so it allows consumers to be a little bit more honest, and it's anonymous and that kind of thing. So you can be pretty honest about what you're experiencing, but it doesn't give you so much leeway to where you can just be like bashing a brand or whatever, which I don't understand why that would be a thing anyway. But a couple of things on bias. Bias is a really big factor in the sensory world, and chapters have been written in the sensory books about bias, and it's kind of a constant consideration. And it's all with the intent of trying to, again, make panelists consistent and taking away all those extraneous factors that could potentially contribute to a false read on what they're experiencing. And so that could be anything from taking away any noises from where they're evaluating, or any external aromas. It could mean blinding the cup so that you don't see purple and think grape. You might want to completely do your evaluation under red light or something like that. So it depends on kind of what you're trying to do and what kind of bias you're trying to diminish. But essentially we just need to acknowledge the fact that humans are going to be a little bit variable. And so it's up to the sensory scientists to try to diminish those factors. And for example, if I know that somebody's having kind of a bad day before they come into panel to evaluate something, I have a good idea that could potentially influence their evaluation. And so I generally try to give people like a little bit of time before they actually start doing their evaluations so that they can just kind of like be and ground themselves and not have to be worrying about what they're doing next. It is all of it. The first thing is just to really kind of be present with what's going on with what you're evaluating so that you can actually focus on the product itself. But it can also be, you can also do things like not change the test type that you do every single time you run a sensory test. You know, if one day you're asking your panelists to scale attributes and the next day you're asking them to just describe something on a blank piece of paper and the next day you're trying to, you get the picture, that can be a bit of a cognitive load. And so in quality control, you know, QC kind of gets a bad rap for being somewhat boring. And that's by design. We need to be using the same methods so that we can build databases of information and also not put a huge cognitive load on our panelists when we're really just trying to measure the stimulus, so the product. So there are a whole bunch of things that you can do to try to diminish that bias. And, you know, not talking to people is one of them, not talking to the people during your tasting, not kind of like making yummy, yucky faces.
That can take things so much.
Right.
I just helped out with a beer competition. And that just that one thing, right? Like you're sitting there and you're like, oh man, my knee-jerk reaction is this is probably going to be about a 25. And then you look over and see one of your fellow judges who happens to be BJ certified and I'm not. And he's sitting there digging on it and like, oh yeah, yum. I'm like, oh crap. Oh, it's not a 25. It's more like a, you know, it's just so easy to, it's crazy. And I mean, I've talked to people like this guy, right? Like Jared, he takes it to the extreme. He won't eat before blending. So even if that's, you know, 5 o'clock at night, he won't eat until dinner time. He won't use deodorant. He won't use toothpaste. He won't, you know, like just everything everything that is not the product is standardized and it's always the same. And it just sort of feels like there's always just one more thing that you're never going to get them all, right? Like you're never going to be able to.
Right.
How many hours sleep did you have last night?
Right.
You know, when was the last time you drank coffee? It's tricky, man. Like, I don't know how deep to go down that rabbit hole.
Well, that's also why I'm a big proponent of panels. And I know that a lot of times if you're like blending, that's kind of a one-person show, maybe two people. And so it is important for that person to be consistent. But I mean, what you just described is all, you know, kind of standard, like you might want to brush your teeth, but like not wearing any perfumes or lotions or shampoos. Now that I don't work consistently in a sensory lab, I'm like, perfumes, bring it on. Like I get excited about it because 10 years I've not been able to like wear anything smelly. And it's a really big deal. Like it can absolutely influence your evaluation and the evaluation of those around you. And so you really kind of do have to be conscious about what your other aromas that you're bringing in are all about. But we are all going to have off days, or maybe I just went on a really big run and that's going to change your senses. Like, you know, we have some variability within our own human selves. And that's why I think we really need a group of people who are acting as that instrument rather than one person. It's really very risky for a business to put it all on one person. So, you know, back at New Belgium, we had about 20 panelists who were quite consistent, but you can get away with 4, 5, 6 people who are consistent. As long as like one person can kind of have an off day, then that's fine. As long as they're not like, they didn't just smoke and then came into panel, everything's going to smell smoky.
Yeah. And I guess a big part of that too is like, it's easy when it's, how do I put it? It's almost like the bigger the company and the more people you have involved, potentially it is easier on the data side of things to create an aggregate score.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, for small companies too, it's got to be pretty hard just to get the hell out of your own way in terms of like just checking your ego at the door. You know, if you're the head taster and you're the one that's having a bad day, I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
can, we've all had those situations where we've worked at places where you don't feel like you can speak your mind, right? And trying to put it in a way that means that, if I'm the person that's quote unquote in charge, that I've got my ego in check enough to just be like, right, I'm saying one thing, but all of you are saying another thing. I'm wrong. And creating an environment where those people feel comfortable dissenting, essentially. I
mean, what you just described is creating a culture of quality, and or just really a culture of excellence. And so, good distillers or really good brewers, they're going to want to hear feedback, and it's not personal. And we're very conscious too with Draught Lab. We understand that that's not the company culture of a lot of places, and it might be a little bit scary to say something's off or whatnot. And so we don't make it easy for comments to become available, and they're all blinded as well. And so individual panelists, as far as like reports go for like anything that's just easily PDFable and sendable to management and whatnot, we blind those comments. We blind the person, and we kind of do that to like protect against that bias and that weird company culture that can persist. But it really is up to the business themselves to like make it safe to just give tasting notes, like, and it can be, this is really where that objective evaluation can truly just purely be objective. Like, it doesn't have to be, I said butter and therefore it's bad. Like, it doesn't have to be that way. It can just be like, here's really my objective evaluation. Or like I said that this wasn't true to target, and that doesn't mean that I'm telling you to dump it. Like, panelists shouldn't have to feel the burden of decision making. They should just be free to give their objective evaluation, and then the decision making should come from the data, and that should come after the fact, but not on the panelist's shoulder. So there really needs to be kind of a separation there. If there's ever like a roundtable discussion or that kind of thing, I've always asked those who are like in charge or the maker to either not sit on that panel or to speak last. Because it will completely skew the outcome of that conversation. In fact, it's funny, this is a timely conversation. I recently started writing a blog post that basically says why sensory scientists shouldn't sit on panel. And it ultimately is because we know way too much about the product. We know where it came from. We know if it had anomalies associated with it or whatnot. We're essentially just too close to it. And so we hold a lot of bias. And so the tasters, in my experience, that are sometimes the best are those who are not in production, like those who are maybe in HR or people who are kind of out on the outskirts of production, because they don't really know what's going on. They don't have any kind of associations with certain attributes, negative or positive, and they can just be very objective. I mean, I once had, we've all kind of had, well, do I tell the story? I'll be vague about the story. I mean, I once had a panelist who had an agenda to just like get beer out the door, and they were a very good panelist and could detect certain off flavors. But when I gave that person off flavors in a panel setting where it was like, trying to get beer out the door, go, 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 everything was a go. And I'm like, as a sensory scientist, you should be able to see that kind of stuff and show panelists, like, I can see your bias. This is what it looks like. Please modify yourself a little bit. And that all goes into the kind of like analysis and interpretation part of sensory data, which can't be diminished. Sensory data is unique because it comes from human beings, and so you need somebody who is analyzing it. They don't have to be a sensory professional by any means, but somebody who looks at the data on a regular basis, who knows their panelists really well, and can kind of pick out those nuances. If we know that Jesse always says nutty, then it's not going to be shocking when he says nutty again, like the next day. But that only comes with time. That only comes with really knowing your panelists. And so this data needs to be interpreted as well as just kind of analyzed on a base level. So,
And I mean, all of this stuff can be quite subtle too, right? I mean, that guy that you talked about, it may have been a conscious decision to I'm gonna personally attempt to skew the data so we make more money. Like it could have been that, or it could have been a subconscious. He's stressing about money and almost doesn't even know he's doing it.
Yep.
Which in that certain situation, I get the funny feeling it was probably more the former rather than the latter. But who knows, right? And it's so common for people. Well, I'm not biased. Yeah, you are, dude. We all are. Every single one of us is biased in some way, shape, or form, and we don't know. We're kind of blind to our own bias, I think, in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of things that people do. Brewlosophy. I'm sure you know Brewlosophy.
I think
Marshall.
you pointed them out to me. Yeah.
Yeah. I bring them up because they're extremely famous in this sort of niche within fermented beverage category, right? And their whole thing is they want to test things. They want to test methods, not necessarily flavors. So they're not saying they don't want to find out whether or not this is more yummy than this. They want to know, I made 2 different beers in 2 different ways. Does it make a freaking difference? Or was that whole, you have to boil for 60 minutes, is that an old wives' tale? So their method is to do a triangle test on everything. Now, I know that you think that it tends to be overused. I think that was you, wasn't it? That
yeah.
You're not a huge proponent
I do think it's overused.
But in that situation, I think it makes sense, right? Like the whole idea is to completely blind everyone that's involved in it from knowing what the hell they're tasting. They've got no idea what they're tasting. It's just, here's 2 beers. Is one different? Can you tell me one's different? And if you can tell me one's different, prove it and pick the one that's different out of the 3. Is there any other sort of like? Well, I mean, feel free to say state your case on that sort of situation and whether you think that the triangle test is ideal for that or not. But is there any other like little tricks like that you think you could use, especially when you're tasting your own product, right? And there's not, like you said, you don't necessarily have numbers to create data from. Is there any other little like physical tricks that we can use to help ourselves out?
Yeah, I mean the triangle test, like you mentioned, I do think that it's overused, and it's when it's used for quality control that's just not appropriate. What you just described to me is a very specific question. If I change this one parameter, am I going to notice a difference? And that is a appropriate use for the triangle test, because the triangle test will show you if there is a significant difference. Now, of course, to find a significant difference, you need a decent amount of panelists. You need to have 20, 30 people doing that same evaluation to see if there really is statistically a significant difference. And so when the question is purely, I was able to hold all this, I was able to control this study, and I just want to know if I change this parameter, is it going to be different or not? Then sure, triangle test works. It's a discrimination test, and so, or a difference test, and that's what they're made to answer. But in quality control, when it comes to, is this product suitable for sale, I think a triangle test is actually too specific a method. You will probably find differences, but it may not matter. And so for the example with your friend, changing a mash parameter or not boiling for 60 minutes, you might find a difference, but it might not have an impact on the overall acceptability, and it might still fall within the range of acceptable variability for that product. And so if the question was, can I get away with doing this for 30 minutes instead of 60 minutes and still sell it as that product? Then the true to target test is actually the method that you would probably want to use. According to this target description, is the sample in or out, the 60-minute and 30-minute. You can kind of see if there are if it's a big enough impact to where it's no longer suitable, where it's no longer within the normal range of variability. And that question more frequently is more useful for people who are in the production setting. It also allows you to only taste 1 beer or 1 whiskey instead of 3 to answer a question about 1. And so it's way less fatiguing. It requires less setup. And a whole bunch of different reasons. But the triangle test is fine. It's just misused for quality control.
Because like you say, at the end of the day, all it says is, are these two things different?
Yep, which sometimes doesn't matter. You can say, yeah, sure, it's different. But I mean, when we were commissioning a different brewery, when I worked for New Belgium, we didn't use triangle tests. We knew that those beers were going to be different. And that was something that we were okay with. But what we wanted to know was, is it within the range of variability that we have already seen in our products anyway? And if not, then we'll have to go back to the drawing board. But you'll be spinning your wheels if you're doing tons of
Yeah. Now, in saying that, would you ever slip, like, do you blind the people from it? So you mentioned earlier on, it's quite often nice to have people that aren't part of the production, right? So if you're part of production team and we're talking whiskey and we just made a product and we've all been saying, oh man, this thing's just trending a little bit too spicy. I'm not sure if we can blend it to not be spicy enough, for example. And now we go in to do the test to find out whether or not it's in. If everyone sitting at the table has already got the idea in their head, is it too spicy? I think it's too spicy. Surely that's going to skew the entire, that everyone's going to be fixated on that. They're more likely to say yes, they're more likely to say no, perhaps depending on their personality. But perhaps the acidity's right off. And do you know what I mean? Like, it's just, if you're too close to the production, like you said, I can just see it completely throwing the test out the window. So will you ever slip something in where you sit down and say, rightio guys, we got a panel today, we're doing 3 different batches, we're testing them, but actually there's only 2? Dun, 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 dun. Or you throw in, the last production bottle and no one knows that's what, will you do things like that just to try and get a read on understanding your panel more?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. If we knew that something was up and we only had one sample, I would probably put 2 or 3 other samples around it and have that be blind. So like in Draught Lab, you can blind the entire sample and just use 3-digit codes, or you can blind the batch number. So you can kind of keep that kind of bias at bay by not showing what barrel it came from or what batch number it's all about. So more often than not, I would suggest to hold that from your panel. If you're doing like a true to target test, you have to know what brand it is, because you're really asking the question, is it true to that brand or not? But you should probably hold the batch back. And if everybody knows that there's a problem going on, add some other samples in there just to kind of like take care of that bias. But that again goes to just trying to hold everything consistent as possible. And understanding that panelists want to be right more than they want to be accurate. So so they're going to go look for the thing that they think is potentially a problem. And so, those little tricks like putting samples around it would work really well. And then just trying to keep like everything else as consistent as possible. If you always run panel at 10 a.m., if you run it at 3 p.m. the next day, it's going to put people, it's going to kind of like pique their interest, and they're going to wonder why you're doing a panel at that time. You can also, keep panelists on their toes by maybe spiking samples here and there, like putting a little bit of food coloring or something in a sample, and just making sure that they're not completely asleep at the wheel. So there are little tricks that you can kind of get your panelists to be a little bit more on their toes. Of course, you wouldn't really want to like spike a sample when you're doing a really high risk evaluation, because that could kind of get people a little bit discouraged and maybe distracted. But yeah,
when like the business is relying on us getting, we've got this big order and we needed to get it out the door, and oh my god, it's like a diacetyl bomb.
Right? Yeah, no, not cool.
And everyone suddenly they're distressing. Yeah, not cool. I didn't even think about that. That's a great. A great point. So it almost seems like what you're saying is you want to, everything that's external from the actual product itself needs to be as completely consistent as possible. So the time of day, the amount of people, the setting, the noises around us, the don't go serving like sushi for lunch and then doing testing one day and then have like insanely spicy Mexican the next day.
Yeah.
like everything that isn't the sample is completely consistent. And then the sample itself, it's almost like you want to do the opposite. You want to randomize it. You don't want to serve the same, how do I put it? You want to keep them on their toes, right? You don't want it to be a pattern where we know that, oh, every time Lindsay comes in, she gives us the last production batch first, and then the one that we're actually testing comes second, and we all know it. And, you know, like you want to keep them on their toes with the actual product itself. Does that kind of make sense? Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's kind of, you know, yes, and all within reason.
Yeah,
a lot of times, like we don't have the ability to do it completely perfectly. Like our image of what like a good sensory panel looks like is, you know, that booth setting with these whitewashed walls and you know, red lights and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
and like that's probably 1-2% of the users that we work with have that kind of facility, and you don't have to have that to be able to kind of take into account some best practices. You could be doing panel in your production on the floor. Like if there's a quiet area on the production floor, then you could be doing panel there. I mean, if all you have the bandwidth to do is to occasionally pull a couple bottles off and taste them just to make sure that they're kind of in line with your expectations, that's fine. Like that's better than doing nothing. And it's useful information. You're just tasting your products, and that's really where one should start. It's just, you know, we don't want people to get overwhelmed with this image of what's perfect. We're gonna be making concessions with what's practical. And you're still going to be getting good information, even if you can't completely blind everything and randomize everything and whatnot. But you're still getting useful tasting data. And then as you grow and as you develop, then you can kind of make those steps to maybe put in a booth setting and whatnot. But a lot of times, like, it's just enough to start and it doesn't have to be a big, huge to do. Mm-hmm.
I think it is kind of, well, there's two types of people when it comes to this sort of thing, right? There's the sort of person that's like, that's all bullshit, dude. I tasted it yesterday and it's fine. Mm-hmm. You know, like they just don't buy into any of this. It's like, dude, I can taste my own whiskey and I know it's fine. Mm-hmm. Like, and that's literally as far as they go. And then there's the other people that tend, like me, I'm firmly in the camp of overthinking it. You know, like I'm always, the idea of just sitting down and tasting something to see if it's better, worse, different, sideways, whatever, is kind of, I'm like, but that doesn't work, you know. Okay. And I guess it really is your job, especially if you're, do you ever just straight contract to companies and get them set up and help them out?
Yeah, that's part of it. So a lot of what we do too is just kind of give people the bones to get going. And get to kind of know their organization and how a tasting program could integrate into their organization in a more kind of targeted space. But a lot of times, like, these conversations can kind of happen relatively quickly, and we just like hop on calls. We're always happy to hop on calls with people. So it doesn't have to be big time like consultation contracts. Like if people have a question about like, hey, this is a thing that my panelists are doing, it's a little bit weird, like help. We're happy to hop on calls and just like talk people through it. But a lot of, you know, we do help people get their programs off the ground. And what's really great about Draught Lab is what we've tried to do is just make it simple enough to where you can just get going, and the process is really clear to use in the app. And so a lot of people will just kind of get going with the basic model, with the basic version, which, by the way, it's like $50 a month. Like, we tried to make it as cheap as possible as well. And so most people kind of get going, and then a lot of questions will start coming up, and then we start kind of having those conversations. And if we're like, if you want us to spend a day with you, we'll do that. But, you know, we're happy to give some free advice here and there too. Yeah,
there's like a quick 15-minute call might fix the problem.
Yeah, that's
speaking of which, if people do want to get in touch, if they do want to check the software out or see just what it is that you guys do in more depth, where would they go to find you?
So for Draft Lab, it's Draft Lab, DRAUGHTLAB.com. And Sample Ox is SAMPLE, ox as in the animal ox, .com as well. And there's info at email addresses for both of those. So you can email me at info@draftlab.com or info@sampleox.com. You can also just email me directly. But yeah, check out our websites, and most of that information is all there. And if you have questions, you can just email me or email info@.
Sweet. All right, we've been at this for an hour and a half, which is crazy. Now, if you're at home, guys, and you have some more specific questions, remember, we're going to have this live stream coming up. And like I said, we haven't nailed down a perfect time yet. So get on the mailing list, get on the Facebook group, and check the details down in the down below the video or in your podcasting software to get those details, or just get in touch with me. Before we go, when we do get off the podcast, I got a couple of quick questions for you from the Patreons. But for everyone else out there, if you have a specific question, feel free to bottle it up and join us with the live stream, because I'm sure we're going to have some downtime in between tastings to throw questions at Lindsay as well. So I have to say a huge thank you, Lindsay. This has been absolutely awesome. I can't wait to see what happens with the live tasting. That's going to be a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So thanks heaps. We appreciate it, and we look forward to the live stream.
Yep. Thank you.